So imagine 1957, Sputnik appears over our heads, launched by the Soviet Union, who we thought at that moment was a post-agrarian society. It goes across Montana to Massachusetts, and it sends a signal, and it freaks us all out because we don't have that technology. So Sputnik then forces America, the United States, to realize that it was basically way behind. We could have, I guess, retaliated in a negative way. But this shifts when someone who's born on Cape Cod becomes president of the United States.
But if I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first, before this decade is out, then we must be bold. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Kennedy doesn't say we're going to meet them where they are. What he says is we are going to take this setback and bounce forward. If we can go to the moon, we can solve anything. So he had this meta-narrative that said no matter what, we're going there. And that changes everything. The other thing it does is it allows people who are not scientists or engineers to participate in it. Because it's not just the technology that's going to get us there, it's the entire culture getting us there so everyone participates in that story. It used to be maybe 10 or even 15 years ago that you could do a business plan for a company, right? And then you'd run the business plan for 5 years and you'd adjust it. Those years are gone. So you're constantly now on a frontier of future building all the time. My name is Brian Collins. I'm a designer by training and by inclination. I studied in Boston at the Massachusetts College of Art, and about 16 years ago, we started Collins, a company that's based in San Francisco and in New York City, and we practice something called transformation design. So when I hear words as ridiculous as future-proofing, which is the dumbest word I've ever heard, it's about resistance. It's about preventing. If you don't look at the future and the future that you're facing as a future building, as a future forming, as a future shaping opportunity, then you're out of business.
You always anticipate a solution of today to become the problem of tomorrow. And this is why bouncing forward as a notion for a resilient answer to a problem might mean we're understanding that we have exaggerated one path, that we've gone too far. Innovation does never mean it has to follow the old path. It means sometimes completely breaking the path. That's a disruption idea. And yet it is going to completely break the path and the purpose of what we've been pursuing before.
I would argue that today, the supply chains and the logistics processes are very well optimized for the world of today. As we move forward with more digitization, more sensors, more AI, any logistics provider has to think about what does that mean for supply chains? What does that mean for logistics? What products will be there in the future? How do we deal with that? What supply chains will serve the better world of tomorrow?
From a resilience point of view, you always start thinking about what is the function of a system that should be provided. This could be providing access to information. This could be providing functionality of a mobility system. And then you're thinking about what are the necessary ingredients, and then where do they come from? And then we're going to ask what would be a resilient way of providing these key ingredients for maintaining core systems, in this case, lots of infrastructures. That would mean A, having more and more places where they can be produced, so decentralization of production. Then we tend to say a second D in resilience is diversity. You want to diversify. This is where they're going into. So it's not all on the same raw materials, dependent on the same stuff we need to dig on the ground. So having a variation of how they could be produced is important. And the other one is then doubling. So having several units that can do the same thing. So in case there's shock in one place, others can pick up. So decentralization, diversity, and redundancy are key criteria of resilient systems.
I think a big element of the semiconductor supply chain and ensuring that there is resilience is a matter of finding balance. Balancing interests, but also balancing strategy. For example, is it better for companies to be capital efficient and lean, or should there be redundancy in the event that something happens?
To create resilience in a supply chain, I truly believe that visibility helps enormously. If we live in a state of no information, then we tend to paint the darker picture. If we know where things are, even if they're not where we need them to be, if we know that they're going to be there in one day, it allows us to plan. It allows us to move ahead with certain plans. Another very important aspect that will come in the future and is already starting to appear is transparency of the entire supply chain. Not just knowing where is my phone that I ordered 3 hours ago and I'm expecting it to be here in 2 hours, but where did the tiniest little component of that phone, where was the chipset produced? The raw material, was it mined with human rights intact? That entire transparency of the supply chain will require a lot of innovation and resilience from people that are trying to introduce that concept of transparency into our supply chains.
So there's a mutual dependency that develops by diverse markets, right? You don't have to be the best at every single application, and you don't have to have a foundry producing every single technology in your geographical region. You have to have some sort of interdependency that leads to peace. When we have open trade and open innovations and transfer of information and products, that eventually, that interdependency leads to us being more reliant on our neighbor, and we get to know our neighbor better and generally have a better world, if you will.
So what's the future path for the semiconductor supply chain? And I think one element that we're missing there is the human element. It's a very important element. We do talk a lot about artificial intelligence and how that can provide quotations quicker, faster. It can manipulate data to allow us to find the best shipping routes, etc. But at the end of the day, there is a person unloading and loading somewhere. So I think we should be actually looking at how do we make equipment to support the people who are actually on the ground? How can they become symbiotic with technology going forward to remove any weak link in the supply chain, thereby providing more resilience?
People actually love change. They love new things, they like improvements. What they don't like is to be changed. So what you have to do is the change that you want to manifest, you have to make that so understandable and so familiar and so easy and so inevitable. You have to socialize and normalize that change.
What I think is very useful about this idea of a mission is that you're fostered to explicitly say where you want to go. Because we have a lot of implicit stuff. We're not really defining anymore. We're talking about wealth, we're talking about progress, we're talking about security, but not really saying what it actually means. So what would be the targets to get after? We can have a climate change mission. We know we have to get out of fossil fuels. We know we have to have renewables. We know we have to rebuild our possibilities in nature to absorb and store carbon. And this is where a mission orientation really helps, because it brings you to the moment of saying, what mission? where do you really want to go? What do you want to achieve? And we have to be aware about reflexivity, which means that the way that we explain to ourselves how we are is going to impact what we anticipate for others to do or the outcomes to be. So the way that we talk about ourselves and what we think is possible is impacting what is going to be possible.
Kennedy has a vision about getting to the moon that energizes not just the sciences, but the arts and humanities. And together, that story helps to familiarize the culture with what Kennedy's vision was by the end of the decade. Disney does something similar in about 1957. He builds what's called Main Street USA, an idealized version of America in about 1910. This beautiful vision of what an iconic American streetscape looks like. You walk down this street and you turn a corner, and in the distance, you see a 10-story rocket ship to the moon right around the corner. So Disney first plants you, this is familiar, and he turns the corner and he said, that's inevitable.
With the progress of the world we have right now, new technologies are inevitable. Things have come out in the last 12 months that we thought would be possible. We just didn't think it's going to happen that fast. And that's very likely not going to slow down. So we have to be open to new technologies, understand the challenges, understand the risks, but be open to see what they can solve for us.
Where do we go next? And that's the thing about semiconductors. It's always on the cusp of a new technology, of a new way of thinking. So it'd be great to tie in with these people who are the innovators, because tomorrow they're the people that will be producing new semiconductors that we will then have to move into the supply chain and hence provide resilience for. That we need to be engaging with these people to understand what direction they're taking to be ready for when their product does go live in 1, 2, 3, 4 years.
Although there are significant challenges and constraints facing the semiconductor supply chain, we're going into a new era. There are so many opportunities at our fingertips for fostering resilience in the semiconductor supply chain, and that should give us a lot of hope moving forward.
Sometimes you just have to be moving and trying things, and then if it doesn't work, you can steer it in a direction that maybe it will work, but you have to be a believer. You have to have, to a certain degree, amount of confidence or arrogance even to keep you in the game. You fail 99% of the time. It's that 1% that you grab onto, and that's that 1% of hope that you have that you're going to find something useful that's going to change society. But you cannot steer a ship that's not moving.
The way I would like to think about resilience is it's not just about enduring the harsh conditions that are, but to imagine what better conditions that can be. That describes a certain vision of resilience that comes from people who are in the margins, but also in the masses, who seem to have no extraordinary power, but who can regenerate, who can reconstitute the world.
Kennedy said this: it's not about one man getting to the moon, it's about our entire nation helping him get there. We're in this together, because this is worth our highest efforts. This is worth our greatest ideals. This is worth our destiny. And we're going to do this together as a society. Not about going backwards, it's about bouncing forwards.